He promised her he'd come back. But sometimes, promises made on the battlefield echo far beyond life itself. This is the story of a soldier, a husband, and a love that refused to die, even in war.
The night was heavy with silence, the kind that only soldiers truly understand. Sergeant James Walker sat on an old wooden crate outside his tent, a small lantern flickering beside him. Around him, the camp buzzed quietly. Some men cleaned their rifles, others whispered prayers. For James, it was a night of reflection, a night before everything changed. He took out a small, leather-bound notebook from his pocket. The corners were worn, the pages smelled faintly of home. He began to write slowly, each word soaked in the weight of love and fear. Greater than my dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I might not be there to hold your hand again, but don't cry for me. I've lived a life full of meaning because you love me. Every time I march into battle, it's your voice that keeps me alive. He paused, his eyes wet with emotion. From his breast pocket, he pulled out a folded photograph, Emma smiling under the cherry blossoms, taken on their last spring together. He pressed it to his lips and whispered, "Greater than I'll come back." I promised her I would. The first light of dawn touched the horizon. In the distance, helicopters began to hum, a reminder that time had run out. James slipped the letter into a small metal box engraved with his name, SGTJ Walker. He handed it to Captain Reeves. "If anything happens, make sure she gets this," the captain nodded. As the sun rose, James stood tall, his silhouette outlined against the golden light, a man stepping into the unknown, carrying both a rifle and a promise.
Hours later, the world was chaos. The desert wind screamed with bullets, explosions, and smoke. James led his unit through the ruins of a destroyed village. The ground trembled beneath their boots. "Walker, we've got movement," Private Cole shouted. "Stay low," James ordered, scanning the horizon. Suddenly, a mortar hit nearby. Dust and debris filled the air. James hit the ground, ears ringing. He could barely hear the screams of his men. When he stood, 3 soldiers were down, to motionless, one crying out for help. James crawled toward the injured man, dragging him behind cover. His uniform was soaked with sweat and sand. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. He thought of Emma again, her letters, her scent, her laughter echoing through their little house back in Georgia. He whispered to himself, "Greater than just hold on, I'll make it back, I promised her." They fought for hours, through fire and confusion. By nightfall, the battlefield was a graveyard of smoke and silence. James looked at the stars again, the same stars from last night, but now dimmed by death and dust.
When James woke, the world was different, darker, quieter. His head throbbed, his body ached. Around him, the ground was littered with twisted metal and the remains of war. He could barely stand, but then he heard it, a faint cry. "Help, over here." It was Cole, trapped under a collapsed wall. James limped toward him, his leg bleeding. He pushed debris away with trembling hands. "Don't move, soldier, I've got you." Cole coughed, gasping for breath. "Sir, why did you come back?" "You could have left me," James smiled weakly. "Because someone once waited for me to come home. I made her a promise, and I don't break promises." They found an abandoned shack nearby and took shelter. That night, as rain poured outside, James told Cole stories about home, the smell of Emma's cooking, the sound of her piano, the way she'd laugh at his bad jokes. Cole listened silently, realizing that war wasn't just about survival, it was about the love people fought for. Outside, lightning struck across the dark sky. Inside, a wounded soldier held on to his promise, a promise that kept both men alive through the longest night of their lives. Days passed, food ran out, ammo ran low. Cole was barely conscious now, his wounds infected. James knew they wouldn't last much longer unless someone found them. He managed to repair their broken radio using spare wires and a dying battery. The static crackled, and James began to speak. "Greater than this is Sergeant James Walker of Echo Squad. Mission compromised. Heavy casualties. Survivors minimal." He took a deep breath. "If anyone hears this, tell my wife, I kept my promise. I fought till the end." The radio hissed, cutting his voice short as artillery shells thundered nearby. He threw himself over Cole as the roof caved in. Pain shot through his body, but he stayed conscious just long enough to see the helicopter lights in the distance. He smiled faintly. "You're going home, kid," he whispered. And then, silence. It was a bright morning in Georgia when Emma heard the knock on her door. Two uniformed officers stood there, solemn, respectful. In their hands was a small metal box. Her heart sank. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. Inside the box, she found his wedding ring, his tags, and that folded letter. Her hands shook as she opened it. "My dearest Emma, if I couldn't return, remember, my love didn't die on the battlefield. It lives in every breath of yours." She pressed the letter to her heart, tears streaming silently down her face. Outside, the wind rustled the American flag, a salute from heaven. Years later, Emma sat in a quiet park, watching her young son, James Jr., play with a toy soldier. He looked up at her and asked, "Greater than Mom, was Dad a hero?" She smiled softly through her tears. Greater than he wasn't just a hero, sweetheart. He was a promise kept, even when the world fell apart. As the sun set, a warm breeze passed through the trees. For a moment, Emma closed her eyes, and she could almost hear his voice, gentle and strong, whispering through the wind, "Greater than I'll always come back, in every heartbeat, in every memory." And in that moment, she smiled, because love, like echoes of battle, never truly fades. The end.